Okay, so let's first consider a PL language whose atoms are P, Q, R, and S. There are a number of different ways, 16 different ways, in fact, to assign truth values to those atoms. Now, crucially, once you assign a truth value to all the atoms of a PL language, that automatically determines a truth value for every other formula of that language too. And that's crucial because it allows us to just focus on all the different ways of assigning truth values to the atoms. When we have some statements of this PL language acting as premises and another acting as conclusion, for example, and we want to know whether there's any possible way to have the premises turn out true while the conclusion turns out false, we just have to look at all the different ways of assigning truth values to the atoms. And that will tell us everything we need to know. But now let's consider a QL language. Suppose it has the proper names M and N, and a one-place predicate F, a two-place predicate L, and a three-place predicate R. Now suppose we have some statements of that language acting as premises and another statement of that language acting as conclusion, for example. And we want to know whether there's any possible way to have the premises turn out true while the conclusion turns out false. What do we turn our attention to in this case? We used to look at all the different ways of assigning truth values to the atoms, but that doesn't apply any longer. So what do we look at instead? We look at every possible valuation or model of our QL language here. Each valuation or model, whatever you want to call it, of a QL language determines a truth value for each and every statement of that QL language. So to see whether there's any way to have the premises turn out true and the conclusion turn out false, we see whether there's any valuation of our QL language that has that result. Now, what exactly is a valuation or model of a QL language? We know that it's supposed to determine a truth value for each and every sentence of that language, but what does it look like? A valuation of a QL language has three parts to it. First, it specifies a set of objects to act as the domain. This set of objects must be non-empty, so there has to be at least one thing in the domain. And when you pick a certain set of objects to act as the domain, you're essentially making a choice about what set of things the language is talking about. So once you specify a domain, say we make the domain consist of the individuals Magnolia, Naveen, James, and Romy, that clarifies what quantified statements are saying. A universally quantified statement is saying that all of those things meet a certain condition. And an existentially quantified statement is saying that at least one of those things meets a certain condition. If you didn't specify a domain, then there'd be no way to evaluate the truth of statements about everything or something, since it wouldn't be clear what things are under discussion. So because we want a valuation for a QL language to yield a truth value for each and every sentence of that language, one thing we need a valuation to do is to settle on the set of things that are under discussion, which we call the domain. Second, a valuation for a QL language assigns to each proper name of that QL language some object from the domain to serve as its reference. So for example, if a QL language has the proper names M and N, then a valuation for that language would assign to M some object in the domain to serve as its reference, and it would assign to N some object in the domain to serve as its reference. One thing to point out here is that a valuation for a QL language just has to assign some referent or other to each proper name in the language. So each name needs to refer to something, but different proper names don't need to be given different reference. Different names can refer to the same thing. And the reason why we want a valuation to specify a referent for each proper name is that without knowing what thing from the domain a proper name refers to, we wouldn't be able to evaluate sentences containing that name. If we don't know what thing N refers to, for example, then we can't say whether LNN is true or not. So this is another part of ensuring that a valuation for a QL language yields a truth value for each and every sentence of that language. Finally, a valuation for a QL language assigns an extension to each predicate of that language. Think of the extension of a predicate as the things that it's true of. So for a one-place predicate, its extension will just be a list of objects from the domain, the objects that that predicate applies to. So if we make the extension of F, say, contain just Magnolia and Naveen, then we're saying that the predicate F is true of them, but not true of anyone else in the domain. For a two-place predicate, its extension will be a list of ordered pairs of objects from the domain. These should be thought of as the ordered pairs that the two-place predicate is true of. For a three-place predicate, its extension will be a list of ordered triples from the domain, the ordered triples that it applies to, and so on. We allow a valuation to make the extension of a predicate be empty, because that's still a way of saying what things the predicate applies to. In that case, it's being supposed that the predicate applies to nothing at all, which still allows us to determine the truth value of statements involving that predicate. For example, if the extension of R is empty, if there are no triples that it's true of, then we know that R, M, and M would have to be false. By contrast, we don't allow a valuation to leave names without a referent. So-called empty names, because then we simply can't evaluate statements involving those names, and the whole point of evaluation for a QL language is that it's supposed to determine a truth value for each and every sentence of that language. So evaluation for a QL language specifies a domain, and then assigns a referent to each proper name and an extension to each predicate. That then determines the truth value for each and every sentence of the language. Now, sometimes people ask questions like, well, how do I know what objects to put in the domain? How do I know what objects to make proper names refer to, or what to put in the extension of each predicate? But those questions don't really make sense because they're presupposing that there's a right way and a wrong way to construct a valuation for a QL language. But as long as you stick to the basic constraints, the domain has to be non-empty. Each proper name has to refer to some object from the domain, and each predicate needs to be assigned an extension, which could be empty. Then you've succeeded in constructing a valuation. Because there are always a ton of ways to stay within those basic constraints, there are always, for any given language, a ton of ways to construct a valuation for it. Now, sometimes you want to construct a valuation that yields a specific outcome. For instance, you want to construct a valuation that makes these formulas all true, or makes these formulas true and this one false. And in that case, you'll have to set up the valuation carefully. But if your goal is just to construct a valuation for a QL language, then there are always a ton of different ways to do it. Now, I said that once you construct a valuation for a language, that then determines a truth value for each and every sentence of the language. How exactly does that work, though? How exactly do we calculate the truth value of each statement once a valuation has been given? Well, start with the atomic formulas. That's when you have a k-ary predicate followed by k terms, like fm or lnm or rmnm. Fm is true as long as the referent of m is in the extension of f, whereas if the thing named by m is not among the things that the predicate f applies to, then fm is false. So on this valuation, where m refers to Magnolia, and Magnolia is indeed in the extension of f, fm is true. LNM is true if the ordered pair consisting of the referent of M followed by the referent of M is in the extension of L. Otherwise, LNM is false. So on this valuation where N refers to Naveen and M refers to Magnolia, LNM is false because the pair Naveen-Magnolia is nowhere to be found in the extension of L. By contrast, the formula LNN is true on this valuation because the pair Naveen-Naveen is in the extension of L. RMNM is true if the ordered triple consisting of the referent of M followed by the referent of N followed by the referent of M is in the extension of R. Otherwise, RMNM is false. Now on this valuation, the extension of R is empty, so RMNM is false on this valuation. Next, we have negations, conjunctions, disjunctions, and conditionals, and their truth value is determined in exactly the same way as before. So, for example, since LNM is false on this valuation, not LNM is true. Because FM is true and LNN is true, the conjunction FN and LNN is also true. The disjunction not LNM or RMNM is true on this valuation because the first disjunct is true, and so on and so forth. Finally, we have universally and existentially quantified formulas. Let's start with a simple example like for all x fx. To calculate that formula's truth value, we actually look at a specific instance of it. We look at fa. And basically what we do is we ask whether that formula would be true regardless of who A refers to. If fa would be true no matter who from the domain A picks out, then for all x fx is true. But if there's some way of specifying a referent for A that would make fa false, then for all x fx is false. Now, since in this case, fa would be false if we chose either James or Romy as the referent for A, then for all x fx is false on this valuation. By contrast, there is an x fx is true on this valuation because for that formula to be true, there only needs to be some way of specifying a referent for A that makes fa true. And if A refers to either Magnolia or Naveen, fa comes out true. Now, I said that when we calculate the truth value of for all x fx, basically what we do is look at the formula fa and ask whether that would be true regardless of who A refers to. And that is essentially what we do. But the official story for how to calculate the truth value of for all x fx is not spelled out in exactly those terms. The official story, the official valuational semantics still starts by telling you to look at fa, but then it says that there are various ways of expanding our original valuation so that a referent is now also assigned to the dummy name A. Because there are 4 members of the domain, there are 4 different ways of doing that. We have one expansion where A refers to Magnolia, one expansion where A refers to Naveen, one where A refers to James, and one where A refers to Romy. At this point, strictly speaking, we have 5 different valuations. We have the original valuation plus 4 different expansions of it. And what the original story says is that for all x fx is true on the original valuation, just in case fa is true on each and every one of those expanded valuations. FA is true on the first expanded valuation, where A refers to Magnolia, because Magnolia is in the extension of F. FA is true on the second expanded valuation, where A refers to Naveen, because Naveen is in the extension of F. But FA is false on the third expanded valuation, where A refers to James, because James is not in the extension of F. And FA is false on the fourth expanded valuation, where A refers to Romy, because Romy is not in the extension of F. Since FA is not true on each one of those expanded valuations, it's false on two of them. For all x, fx is not true on the original valuation. By contrast, because FA is true on at least some of the expanded valuations, it's true on two of them, there is an x, fx is true on the original valuation. Now let's look at some slightly more complicated examples. We'll start with for all x, there is a y such that lxy. Is that true or false on this valuation? We know from our practice with translation that, assuming that L stands for loves, that formula is saying that everyone has at least someone that they love. So that formula should be false on this valuation, because if we look at it, we can see that while Magnolia, Naveen, and James all have someone that they love, Romy does not. But while we can use our skill with translation to work out what the truth value of that formula should be on this valuation, you also should know how to calculate the truth value of formulas like that according to the official semantics, because sometimes you'll want to be able to work out the truth value of a formula without having a translation of that formula already in hand. For instance, you might be trying to figure out whether there is an x such that it's not the case that for all y, Lyx says the same thing as there is someone that no one loves. To figure that out, you need to check whether the English statement and the formula always have the same truth value, which means that you need to be able to calculate the truth value of the formula independently without already knowing what the correct translation is, because that's precisely what you're trying to figure out. So let's go through how to work out the truth value of for all x, there is a y such that lxy on the official semantics, and then we'll come back to there is an x such that it's not the case that for all y, Lyx. So first, to work out the truth value of for all x, there is a y such that lxy, we look at the instance, there is a y such that lay. For all x, there is a y such that lxy to be true, that instance would have to be true no matter who A refers to. In other words, there is a y such that lay has to be true on each and every way of expanding the original valuation by providing a referent for A. So now we shift our focus to those four expanded valuations. The first one assigns Magnolia as the referent for A. Is there is a y such that lay true when we make Magnolia the referent of A? In other words, is that formula true on this first expanded valuation? Well, this formula is itself a quantified statement. So officially, we determine whether it's true by turning our attention to the instance LAB. We focus on the instance LAB because it's the instance of there is a y such that lay that we get if we create an instance by using the first dummy name, first in terms of alphabetical order, that doesn't already appear in the width. The idea is then that we determine whether there is a y such that lay is true on the first expanded evaluation, where Magnolia has been assigned as a referent of A, by looking at whether lab is true on any of the ways of expanding that valuation by further assigning a referent to B. Since there are 4 members of the domain, there are 4 ways of expanding that valuation by assigning a referent to B. One where B refers to Magnolia, one where B refers to Naveen, and so on. LAB is true on the second of those expanded valuations because the ordered pair Magnolia-Naveen is in the extension of L. Because LAB is true on the second of these expanded valuations, that means that there is a Y such that LAY is true on the valuation one level back where Magnolia has been assigned as the referent of A. But now we have to check whether there is a Y such that LAY is true on the expanded valuation where Naveen has been assigned as the referent of A. And to figure that out, we have to look at whether LAB is true on any way of expanding that valuation by assigning a referent to B. LAB is true when that valuation is expanded by assigning Naveen as the referent of B because the ordered pair Naveen-Naveen is in the extension of L. Because LAB is true when this valuation is expanded by assigning Naveen as the referent of B, and also when it's expanded by letting B refer to James, because Naveen James is also in the extension of L, that means that there is a Y such that LAY is true on the valuation one level back where Naveen has been assigned as the referent of A. Now we move on to checking whether there is a Y such that LAY is true on the valuation where James has been assigned as the referent of A. And again, to work that out, we have to look at all the ways of expanding that valuation by further assigning a referent to B. LAB has to be true on at least one of those valuations. And indeed, LAB is true on 2 of them, when B refers to Magnolia and when B refers to Romy, because the pair James-Magnolia is in the extension of L and the pair James-Romy is in the extension of L. So there is a Y such that LAY is true on the valuation one level back where James has been assigned as the referent of A. Finally, we have to check whether there is a Y such that LAY is true on the valuation where Romy has been assigned as the referent of A. And here we find that the answer is no, because when we look at all the ways of expanding that valuation by assigning a referent to B, we find that LAB is false on all of them. So while there is a Y such that LAY is true on some of the ways of expanding the original valuation by assigning a referent to A, it's not true in every case. In particular, it's false in the last case. So the formula for all x, there is a Y such that LXY is false on the original valuation, just as we thought it should be. Now finally, let's return to the formula there is an x such that it's not the case that for all y, LYX, and the question of whether that says the same thing as there is someone that no one loves. Let's first think about whether that English statement is true on the valuation we have in front of us. On this valuation, there is someone that loves Magnolia, there is someone that loves Naveen, there is someone that loves James, and there's someone that loves Romy. So there isn't anyone that is completely unloved, so the statement, there is someone that no one loves, is false on this valuation. Now, what about the formula? If it's really saying the same thing as the English statement, it should always have the same truth value as that English statement, meaning that they should have the same truth value on every valuation. Is that the case here? Is the formula also false? Well, to determine the truth value of there is an x such that it's not the case that for all y, ly, x, we have to look at the instance not for all y, ly, a. As long as that formula is true on some way of expanding the original valuation by assigning a referent to a, that will make there is an x such that it's not the case that for all y, ly, x true on the original valuation. Well, let's suppose that we expand the original valuation by letting a refer to Magnolia. Is not for all y, ly, a true in that case? Well, not for all y, ly, a is true on a valuation just as long as the formula being negated for all y, ly, a is false on that valuation. So now the question becomes whether for all y, ly, a is false on this valuation where a has been stipulated to refer to Magnolia. To figure that out, we have to look at whether LBA is true on every way of expanding that valuation by further assigning a reference to B. So now suppose that we expand that valuation by letting B refer to Magnolia. LBA is false on that valuation because the pair Magnolia is not in the extension of L. That means that for all y, ly, a is false on the valuation where Magnolia has been assigned as the referent of a. Thus, not for all y, ly, a is true on that valuation. And thus, there is an x such that not for all y, ly, x is true on the original valuation. So that formula is not saying the same thing as there is someone that no one loves, because that English statement is false on this valuation, whereas the formula is true. So what is the formula saying? It's saying that there is someone that not everyone loves. And Magnolia is an example of such a person here, because it's not true that everyone loves her. And we know that because not even Magnolia loves Magnolia in this little model or valuation that we've built.